let's hop back into it. Got day two. Same thing, Steve Jobs. I think where we left off was trying to woo that boy over from PepsiCo. Yeah, man, if you've been trying to just read more, pull up a chair, man. We are 151, page 151. Yeah, just get that presentation to Scully and everything like that. So when they finished talking, it was close to midnight. This has been one of the most exciting evenings in my whole life, Jobs said as Scully walked him back to the Carlisle. I can't tell you how much fun I've had. When he finally got home to Greenwich, Connecticut, that night Scully had trouble sleeping. Engaging with Jobs was a lot more fun than negotiating with bottlers. It stimulated me, roused my long-held desire to be an architect of ideas. He later noted, the next morning Roche called Scully. I don't know what you guys did last night, but let me tell you, Steve Jobs is ecstatic, he said. And so the courtship continued. With Scully playing hard but not impossible to get, Jobs flew east for a visit one Saturday and Friday in February and took a limo up to Greenwich. Greenwich. Uh, I'm gonna say Greenwich because I don't know. It just sounds better. Um, took a limo up to Greenwich. He found it. He found Scully's newly built mansion ostentatious, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, but he admired the 300-pound custom-made oak doors that were so carefully hung and balanced that they swung open with the touch of a finger. Steve Jobs was fascinated by that because he is, as I am, a perfectionist, Scully recalled. Thus began the somewhat unhealthy process of a starstruck Scully perceiving in Jobs qualities that he fancied in himself. Scully usually drove a Cadillac, but since his guest taste, he borrowed his wife's Mercedes 450 SL convertible to take Jobs to see Pepsi's 144-acre corporate headquarters, which was as lavish as Apple's was austere. Austere. We'll come back through and find that later. Austere. Yeah, look that up. How he gonna take him to Pepsi, where he trying to take bruh from? Crazy. Got the wolf in the fox in the hen house, man. Got the fox in the hen house, man. Gonna bring Steve over there. Steve gonna get the ideas. He gonna try to do what he could do, and still, bruh, 144 acres. But either way, austere. To Jobs, it epitomized the difference between the feisty new digital economy and the Fortune 500 corporate establishment. A winding drive led through manicured fields and a sculpture garden, including pieces by Rodin, Moore, Calder, and Giacometti, to a concrete and glass building designed by Edward Durrow Stone. Scully's huge office had a Persian rug, 9 windows, a small private garden, a hideaway study, and its own bathroom. When Jobs saw the corporate fitness center, he was astonished that executives had an area with his own whirlpool, separate from that of the regular employees. That's weird, he said. Scully hastened to agree. As a matter of fact, I wasn't against it, and I go over and work out sometimes in the employees area, he said. Their next meeting was a few weeks later in Cupertino when Scully stopped on his way back from a Pepsi Bottlers convention in Hawaii. Pepsi Bottlers convention in Hawaii. That's tough. Mike Murray, the Macintosh marketing manager, took charge of preparing the team for the visit, but he was not clued in on the real agenda. PepsiCo could end up purchasing literally thousands of Macs over the next few years. He exulted in a memo to the Macintosh Macs over the next few years. He exulted in a memo to the Macintosh staff. During the past year, Mr. Scully and a certain Mr. Jobs have become friends. Mr. Scully is considered to be one of the best marketing heads in the big leagues. As such, let's give him a good time here. Jobs wanted Scully to share his excitement about the Macintosh. This product means I think I told you the other day. Told you guys the other day. It's MacBook. Nah, Macintosh. Oh yeah, day two by the way. Forgot to say that. Um, wanted so Jobs wanted Scully to share his excitement about the Macintosh. This product means more to me than anything I've done. He said, I wanted you to be the first person outside of Apple to see it. He dramatically pulled the prototype out of a vinyl bag and gave a demonstration. Scully found Jobs as memorable as his machine. He seemed more a showman than a businessman. Every move seemed calculated as if it rehearsed to create an occasion of the moment. Showmanship. Okay. Than a businessman. To create an occasion of the moment, Jobs had asked Hertzfeld and the gang to prepare a special screen display for Scully's amusement. He's really smart, Jobs said. You wouldn't believe how smart he is. The explanation that Scully might buy a lot of Macintoshes for Pepsi sounded a little bit fishy to me, Hertzfeld recalled. But he and Susan Kerr created a screen of Pepsi caps and cans that danced around with the Apple logo. Hertzfeld was so excited he began waving his arms around during the demo, but Scully seemed underwhelmed. He asked a few questions, but he didn't seem all that interested. Hertzfeld recalled, he never ended up warming up to warming. He never ended up warming to Scully. He was incredibly phony, a complete puss. He was incredibly phony, a complete posier, posier, posier. I'm gonna say posier, a complete posier. He later said he pretended to be interested in technology, but he wasn't. He was a marketing guy, and that it was marketing, and that it would, and that is what marketing guys are, paid posiers. Hence, why he can go from Pepsi to Apple, or from an Apple to a FIFA, to a FIFA to NBA. No matter the product, we just marketing, put it in front of the face. Okay. Matters came to a head when Jobs visited. Matters came to a head when Jobs visited New York in March 1983 and was able to convert the courtship into a blind and blinding romance. I really think you're the guy, Jobs said as they walked through Central Park. I want you to come and work with me. I can learn so much from you, Jobs. Learn so much from you. Jobs, who had cultivated father figures in the past, knew just how to play to Scully's egos and insecurities. It worked. I was smitten by him, Scully later admitted. Steve was one of the brightest people I'd ever met. I shared with him a passion for ideas. Scully, who was interested in art history, steered them toward the Metropolitan Museum for a little test of whether Jobs was really willing to learn from others. I wanted to see how well he could take coaching in a subject where he had no background. He recalled as they strolled through the Greek and Roman antiquities, Scully expounded on the differences between the yeah, yeah, archaic sculpture, archaic, archaic sculpture of the 6th century BC and the Periclean sculptures of a century later. Jobs, who loved to pick up historical nuggets he had never learned in college, seemed to soak it in. I gained the sense that I could be a teacher to a brilliant student. Hmm. Jobs, who loved to pick up historical nuggets he never learned in college, seemed to soak it in. I gained the sense that I could be a teacher to a brilliant student, Scully recalled. Once again, he indulged the conceit. Once again, he indulged the conceit that they were alike. I saw in him a mirror image of my younger self. I too was impatient, stubborn, arrogant, impetuous. My mind exploded with my mind exploded with ideas, often to the exclusion of everything else. I too was intolerant of those who couldn't live up to my demands. As they continued their long walk, Scully confided that on vacations he went to the left bank in Paris to draw in his sketchbook. If he hadn't become a businessman, he would be an artist. Jobs replied that if he weren't working with computers, he could see himself as a poet in Paris. They continued down Broadway to Colony Records on 49th Street, where Jobs showed Scully the music he liked, including Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Ella Fitzgerald, and Wyndham Hill, jazz artists. Then they walked all the way back up to the San Remo on Central Park West and 74th, where Jobs was planning to buy a two-story tower penthouse apartment. The consummation occurred outside the penthouse on one of the terraces, with Scully sticking close to the wall because he was afraid of heights. First, they discussed money. I told him I needed $1 million in salary and $1 million for a sign up bonus, said Scully. Man, we already knew that. We saw that. He had that for the other guy. Okay. But this guy comes from Pepsi though. You know. Um he said he need that. That 1 mil and that 1 million on that sign on bonus. And so Jobs claimed that would be doable. Even if I had to pay it for it even if I had to pay for it out of my own pocket, he said, well, I had to solve those problems because you're the best person I've ever met. I know you're perfect for Apple, and Apple deserves the best. He added that never before he worked for someone he really respected, but he knew that Scully was the person who could teach him the most. Jobs gave him his unblinking stare. Scully uttered one last demur, uttered one last demur, dimmer, one last demur. I like demur. Demur sound good. Scully uttered one last demur. I'll figure it out later. A token suggested that maybe they should just be friends and he could offer Jobs advice from the sidelines. Anytime you're in New York, I love to send. What? What happened to the? I thought it was locked in. $1 million. I need that. I need the $1 million. I need the 1 million on the bonus. Jobs, yeah, bro. We can make that happen. I'll just pay for that out of pocket if I got to. He must ain't like that. What do you mean you gotta pay for that out of pocket? Scully uttered one last demur, a token suggesting that maybe they should just be friends and he could offer Jobs advice from the sidelines. Anytime you're in New York, I love to spend time with you. He later recounted the climactic moment. Steve's head dropped as he stared at his feet. After a weighty, uncomfortable pause, he issued a challenge that would haunt me for days. Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water, or do you want the chance to change the world? Sugar water. Mm. Scully felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. There was no response. There was no response possible other than to acquiesce. He had an uncanny ability to get what he wanted, to size up a person and know exactly what to say to reach a person. Scully recalled, I realized for the first time in 4 months that I couldn't say no. The winter sun was beginning to set. They left the apartment and walked back across the park to the Carlisle, the honeymoon. Scully arrived in California just in time for the May 1983 Apple management retreat at Fajardo's Dunes. Even though he had left all but one of his dark suits back in Greenwich, he was still having trouble adjusting to the casual atmosphere. In the front of the meeting room, Jobs sat on the floor in the lotus position, absent-mindedly playing with the toes of his bare feet. Scully tried to impose an agenda. He wanted to discuss how to differentiate their products: the Apple II, the Apple III, Lisa, and the Mac, and whether it made sense to organize the company around product lines or markets or functions. but the discussion descended into a free for all of random ideas, complaints, and debates. At one point, Jobs attacked the Lisa team for producing an unsuccessful product. I told y'all, they took that from him. He came up with the Mac. He trying, do whatever he can to just destroy them boys. But he said at one point, Jobs attacked the Lisa team for producing an unsuccessful product. Keep in mind, Lisa is named after his daughter. But this is the daughter that he claimed wasn't his daughter for like the first 10, 11 years of her life. But either way, he attacking them, talking about they produced an unsuccessful product. Well, someone shot back. You haven't delivered the Macintosh. Why don't you wait until you get a product out before you start being critical? Scully was astonished at Pepsi. No one would have challenged the chairman like that. Yet here, everyone began pigpiling on Steve. It reminded him of an old joke he had heard from one of the Apple ad salesmen. What's the difference between Apple and the Boy Scouts? The Boy Scouts have adult supervision. We, in the midst of the bickering, a small earthquake began to rumble the room. No way, bro. An earthquake. Earthquake. In the midst of everybody getting on Steve. Okay. What happens next? In the midst of the bickering, a small earthquake began to rumble the room. Head for the beach, someone shouted. Everyone ran through the door to the water. Then someone else shouted that the previous earthquake had produced a tidal wave, so they all turned and ran the other way. The indecision, the contradictory advice, the indecision, the contradictory advice, the specter of natural disaster, only foreshadowed what was to come. Scully later wrote, one Saturday morning, Jobs invited Scully and his wife Lizzie, Lizzie, Leezy, Lizzie, gotta be Lizzie over for breakfast. He was then living in a nice but unexceptional Tudor style home in Los Gatos with his girlfriend Barbara Jasinski, a smart and reserved beauty who worked for Regis McKenna. Lizzie had brought a pan and made vegetarian omelets. Jobs had edged away from his strict vegan diet for the time being. I'm sorry I don't have much furniture, Jobs apologized. I just haven't gotten around to it. It was one of his enduring quirks. His exacting standards of craftsmanship, combined with a Spartan streak, made him reluctant to buy any furnishing that he wasn't passionate about. He had a Tiffany lamp, an antique dining table, and a laser disc video attached to a Sony Trinitron, but foam cushions on the floor rather than sofas and chairs. Scully smiled and mistakenly thought that was similar to his own frantic and Spartan life in a cluttered New York City apartment early in his own career. Jobs confided in Scully that he believed he would die young, and therefore he needed to accomplish things quickly so he would make his mark on Silicon Valley history. We all have a short period of time on this earth, he told the Scullys as they sat around the table that morning. We probably only have the opportunity to do a few things really great and do them well. None of us have any idea how long we're going to be here, nor do I. But my feeling is I've got to accomplish a lot of these things while I'm young. Jobs and Scully would talk dozens of times a day in the early months of their relationship. Steve and I became soulmates, near constant companions. Scully said we tended to speak in half sentences and phrases. Jobs flattered Scully. When he dropped by to hash something out, he would say something like, "You're the only one who will understand." They would teach each other repeatedly, indeed so often that it would have been worrying how happy they were to be with each other and working in tandem. And at every opportunities, Scully would find similarities with Jobs and point them out. We would complete each other's sentences because we were on the same wavelength. Steve would rouse me from sleep at 2 a.m. with a phone call to chat about an idea that suddenly crossed his mind. Hi, it's me, he'd harmlessly say to the dazed listener, totally unaware of the time. I curiously had done the same in my Pepsi days. Steve would rip apart a presentation he had to give the next morning, throwing out slides and text. So I had as I struggled to turn public speaking into an important management tool during my early days. So had I as I struggled to turn Steve would rip apart a presentation he had to give the next morning, throwing out slides and text. So I so had I as I struggled to turn public speaking into an important management tool during my early days at Pepsi. As a young executive, I was always impatient to get things done and often felt I could do them better myself. So did Steve. Sometimes I felt as if I was watching Steve playing me in a movie. The similarities were uncanny, and they were behind the amazing symbiosis we developed. This was self-delusion, and it was a recipe for disaster. Jobs began to sense it early on. We had different ways of looking at the world, different views on people, different values. Jobs recalled. I began to realize this a few months after he. I began to realize this a few months after he arrived. He didn't learn things very quickly, and the people he wanted to promote were usually bozos. Yet Jobs knew that he could manipulate Scully by encouraging his belief that they were so alike, and the more he manipulated Scully, the more contemptuous of him he became. Kenny observers in the Mac group, such as Joanna Hoffman, soon realized what was happening and knew that it would make the inevitable breakup more explosive. Dang, how long he been here? The more he manipulated Scully, the more contemptuous of him he became. Contemptuous. Look that word up. You gotta figure that one out. Contemptuous. Okay. Um, Steve made Scully feel like he was exceptional. She said, Scully had never felt that. Scully became infatuated because Steve projected on him a whole bunch of attributes that he didn't really have. When it became clear that Scully didn't match all of those projections, Steve's distortion of reality had created an explosive situation. Mm. The ardor eventually began to cool on Scully's side as well. Part of his weakness in trying to manage a dysfunctional company was his desire to please other people. One of my many traits that he did not share with one of many traits that he did not share with Jobs. He was a polite person that caused him to recoil at Jobs' rudeness to their fellow workers. We would we would go to the Max building at 11 at night, he recalled, and they would bring him code to show. In some cases, he wouldn't even look at it. He would just take it and throw it back at him. I say, "How can you turn it down?" He would say, "I know they could do better." Scully tried to coach him. "You got to learn to hold things back," he told him at one point. Giles would agree, but it was not his nature to filter his feelings through a gauze. Scully began to believe that Giles' mercurial personality and erratic treatment of people were in his rooted deep in his psychological makeup, perhaps the reflection of a mild bipolarity. There were big mood swings. Sometimes he would be ecstatic, and at other times he was depressed. At times he would launch into brutal tirades without warning, and Scully would have to calm him down. 20 minutes later, I would get another call, and be told to come over because Steve is losing it again. He said their first substantive disagreement was over how to price the Macintosh. He had been conceived It had been conceived as a $1,000 machine, but Jobs' design changes had pushed up the cost so that the plan was to sell it at a thousand $1,995. However, when Jobs and Scully began making plans for the huge launch and marketing push, Scully decided that they needed to charge $500 more. To him, the marketing costs were like any other production costs and needed to be factored into the price. Jobs resisted furiously. It would destroy everything we stand for, he said. I want to make this a revolution, not an effort to squeeze out profits. Scully said it was a simple choice. He could have the 1995 price, like the $1,000 and 995 price, or he could have the marketing budget for a big launch, but not both. You're not going to like this, Jobs told Hirschfeld and other engineers. But Scully is insisting that we charge $2,495 for the Mac instead of $1,000 $995. Indeed, the engineers were horrified. Hirschfeld pointed out that they were designing the Mac for people like themselves, and overpricing would be a betrayal of what they stood for. Okay, and it's like I understand that, like I get that, but I guess I need to know the numbers. How much are you spending on marketing? Cause like, let's say you do a million units the first year, $500. What's that? 500 million. 500 million for marketing costs? He wild. Okay, he wild. 500 million in a year. As if they do a million units though. Indeed, the engineers were horrified. Hirschfeld pointed out that they were designing the Mac for people like themselves, and overpricing it would be a betrayal of what they stood for. So Jobs promised them, "Don't worry, I'm not going to let them get away with it." But in the end, Scully prevailed. Even 25 years later, Jobs seethed when recalling the decision. It's the main reason the Macintosh sales slowed and the Microsoft got to dominate the market. The decision made him feel that he was losing control of his product and company, and this was as dangerous as making a tiger feel cornered. Mm, okay, man. Let me make sure my math is correct. Million units times an extra 500. No, I'm not tripping. That's 500 million. No way. I mean, but shoot, he said they got away with it. He got away with it. Like, let me see. How many units did they sell? How many units did Macintosh do its first year? 250,000 units. Okay. Demand was increasingly high at launch, with the computer famously hitting 70,000 units sold in its first 100 days. Hmm. However, sales slowed down significantly later in the year as software availability was initially limited. Dang. So the math on that. 250,000 times that 500. That's still, bro. That's still 125 million for marketing. That's crazy. Marketing. Super Bowl commercials, ain't it? Nah, that's fire though. Okay, so shoot, we just gotta see how it turn out with Scully and them. We get Scully gone, cause he already wasn't able to get away with the getting Scully not to be able to that price. He got that through. Bro, feeling like a tiger cornered in a cage. They said, say that get bad. Everybody get burnt. Whole company get burnt. But shoot, we'll see. Like I said, day 2, man. If you just trying to read more or whatever, tap in with me. Pull up a chair.